What if I told you there's a country where the sun doesn't set for 2 full months, and where in the dead of winter it doesn't rise at all? Where mountains plunge so steeply into the sea that the water below them is deeper than the height of the Eiffel Tower? Where a civilization built some of the most fearsome ships in history, yet never once raised a single pyramid, colosseum, or stone palace? This is Norway. And the real mystery here isn't how people survived, it's why anyone chose to stay. Norway sits at the northern edge of the European continent, a long, narrow sliver of rock and water pressed between the North Sea and Scandinavia's spine. It stretches 1,752 kilometers from its southern tip to its northernmost point. Yet in some places, it is barely 6 kilometers wide. It is a country shaped entirely by pressure. The pressure of glaciers that scraped these valleys clean 100,000 years ago. The pressure of the Atlantic endlessly hammering its coastline. And the pressure, quieter but no less powerful, of human beings who chose to build a life here anyway. In the next 15 minutes, we'll follow Norway from its windswept southern coast to the frozen edge of the Arctic, through fjords, forests, medieval stave churches, and cities of glass, tracing a single question this landscape keeps asking again and again. Can silence be powerful, or does power always have to make noise? Before we go anywhere, let's establish the scale of what we're dealing with. Norway has more coastline than any country in continental Europe. Over 100,000 kilometers if you follow every inlet, island, and skerry. That's more than twice the circumference of the Earth. It is home to Sognefjorden, the deepest fjord in the world, where the water plunges 1,308 meters below the surface. That is deeper than the cruising altitude of many helicopters. Norway was one of the poorest countries in Europe as recently as 1960. Then, in 1969, engineers struck oil in the North Sea. Today, Norway manages a sovereign wealth fund worth more than $1.7 trillion, the largest in the world. The Norwegian wolf went extinct here in 1966. It returned on its own in 1983, crossing from Finland without human help. The wilderness, it turns out, has its own agenda. And then there is this. In the Arctic archipelago of Svalbard, there are more polar bears than people. One of the few places on Earth where you are legally encouraged to carry a rifle, not for hunting, but for self-defense. Now, let's go north. Let's explore the places that make Norway one of the most quietly extraordinary landscapes on Earth. Have you ever wanted to stand on the edge of something with no railing, no fence, 600 meters above a fjord, and simply look? Preikestolen is a flat-topped cliff that juts out above Fjord like a natural diving board, perfectly rectangular, 25 meters wide, 25 meters deep. Geologists believe it formed when meltwater froze inside cracks in the cliff during the last ice age, splitting the rock clean. Nature accidentally built a balcony. The hike takes about 2 hours, through birch forests twisted by wind, roots gripping rock like fingers, and then suddenly the trees disappear, the sky opens, and the fjord below looks so far away it almost feels unreal. 300,000 people come here each year, and remarkably, no fatal falls have ever been recorded. Maybe that says something about Norwegian caution, or maybe it's the quiet power of awe. Sognefjorden is the king of fjords. It stretches 204 kilometers inland. Its cliffs rise more than 1,700 meters above water that is over a kilometer deep. You could submerge the Burj Khalifa here and it would vanish completely. But numbers don't capture the feeling. Travel this fjord in early spring and the silence feels almost architectural. The water becomes a mirror. Snow-capped peaks reflect perfectly. Waterfalls fall in thin silver threads. The sound they make when they reach the surface far below is barely more than a whisper. Villages cling to narrow ledges of rock. Communities so isolated that for centuries their dialects became unintelligible just 50 kilometers away. Isolation versus connection. The fjord imposes the first. Humans insist on the second. Here is something that doesn't quite make sense. In the center of Norway, not the Arctic North, lies a plateau the size of Delaware, an Arctic desert. Hardangervidda sits more than 1,000 meters above sea level, treeless, wind-scoured. Winter temperatures drop below -30 degrees. And yet, this is home to Europe's largest herd of wild reindeer. More than 11,000 animals moving across the plateau. The Vikings crossed this wilderness on foot. In 1943, Norwegian resistance fighters used it as cover to sabotage a Nazi heavy water facility, an act that may have changed the course of the war. In a place that appears incapable of sustaining life, history was quietly rewritten. High in Norway's interior sits a town that shouldn't exist, Røros. Founded in 1644 after copper was discovered in the surrounding mountains, winters here fall below -50 degrees Celsius. Yet people stayed. When the copper ran out, the town didn't disappear. Because in Norway, survival isn't temporary, it's tradition. But there is something strange about Norway. For a country surrounded by some of the most violent seas on Earth, Norwegians rarely talk about conquering nature. Instead, they do something quieter. They build with it. And nowhere shows that philosophy more clearly than a road that was never supposed to survive the ocean. The Atlantic Road stretches across small islands connected by 8 sweeping bridges. Drive it on a calm day and it feels like a painting. Drive it during a storm, and waves crash across the roadway. The sea comes for the road with absolute force, and the road simply continues. A thin human line threading through a landscape determined to erase it. Far north lies Tromsø, the largest city above the Arctic Circle. In winter, the sun does not rise for 2 months. In summer, it never sets. Here, people measure time differently, not by daylight, but by weather, by aurora, by the color of twilight. The northern lights appear here around 200 nights each year. They make no sound at all, yet standing beneath them, the silence feels enormous. And then there is Svalbard, an Arctic archipelago nearly 78 degrees north. The town of Longyearbyen holds about 2,400 residents. Inside one of its mountains, something extraordinary exists. A vault holding more than 1 million seed samples from nearly every country on Earth. Humanity's agricultural backup drive, insurance against catastrophe, quietly buried in the permafrost of a remote Arctic island. We began with a question, whether silence could be powerful. Norway answers that question not with arguments, but with landscapes. A fjord deeper than a skyscraper, a plateau where history was changed in secrecy, a road standing calmly in the face of the Atlantic Ocean, a tiny Arctic town protecting the future of global agriculture. In Norway, power rarely announces itself. It doesn't shout. Norway isn't shouting. It's simply waiting for you to notice. If Norway sparked something in you, curiosity, wonder, or the desire to stand very still at the edge of a very tall cliff, subscribe for more journeys through the world's most extraordinary landscapes. And tell me in the comments, which of these places would you visit first, Svalbard or somewhere else entirely? I'd love to know where Norway is calling you.